Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Bavarian and today we got some exciting stuff to talk about in the latest Tinto talks, which is, well, nobody wants to admit it, but basically dev diaries for Europa Universalis V. And today we learned a whole good chunk about government that we will of course talk about, but maybe even more importantly, I think it is fair to say that 1337 as the start date has now actually been confirmed. Well, again, not literally and not explicitly, but very much when we take a look at it. Let's start this video right away because there is of course a lot to talk about by taking a look at the potential start date. Let's start by talking about this map right here. This was the header for today's dev diary and, well, in this dev diary we didn't really talk about this map. However, of course, there is a lot to talk about here nonetheless. What we can see as named provinces are the smallest unit on the map, called a location. In this game, this is basically the equivalent to Imperator Rome's smallest tiles. And initially I looked at this and I said, wow, that is very pretty. This will be a gorgeous, gorgeous map. And then I looked around and said, hey, wait a minute, I don't think these lines that we have everywhere here are rivers. I think these might be borders. And so, boom, look at that. We are taking a look now here at what I think is roughly every single line that I could find on the map. And all of a sudden we have a political map. A political map that hilariously looks like 1337. We can see a whole array of familiar faces. For example, the Byzantines still seem eerily powerful. Then right there are the Ottomans before they even smashed their western neighbors. We can see that the Ilkhanate has collapsed. We can see a pretty strong Georgia. And if you take a look at Achaia, so everything going on in southern Greece, you will see the Venetians, you will see the leftover hold when it comes to the Byzantine Empire there as well. And I think that is something quite to behold because, well, this political situation, even though there are some deviations, really only existed in 1337. Somebody posted this map as well, where you can see some particular guesses to which person could be on this map. And then somebody else pointed out that what we have right here seems eerily familiar with this map, which is just a beautiful map of 1337 in this period. I think it is fair to say that these borders are much, much too close for, any of this to be coincidence. I think especially when it comes to Anatolia, in particular when it comes to Achaia, so to Greece in general, when we look at those borders, when we look at Serbia, then, well, I don't really have anything else to say other than for me it's 1337, and I would basically want to place a bet there if that was something you could do. Anyway, this was just the news about the start date. Let's get into the actual dev diary. Today's dev diary was of course actually about a completely different topic, namely about governments. Governments is a very important topic for the EU series in general. We're going to of course see this as well. Johan has been around since forever effectively, meaning that there will be a lot of inspiration coming even from earlier EU titles than just EU4. It is vital that this stuff is gotten right. EU4 honestly has a really in-detail implementation of governments, but it is all really just aiming at the topic of, hey, how do I stack the best modifiers? It is so important to get it right for this game because this is the period where we go from feudal situations, so from interpersonal power relationships that have a relatively loose hierarchy that is all then just based in tradition, to an absolutist and of course a system-oriented approach. You are forming for the very first time a genuine full-on state rather than, again, feudal-like interpersonal relationships. And I shouldn't say for the very first time. There were definitely other circumstances like in China or in the Roman Empire where that was the case as well. This means that what now comes next is vital for how the game will feel throughout the centuries. Let's start by talking about the 5 different government types in the game, which determines a fair bit of what type of mechanics you get access to. As an example, a republic does not have access to royal marriages, and a steppe horde has a different view on how war, peace, and conquest works, compared to other types of countries. There are monarchies that use legitimacy, republics that use republican traditions, theocracies that use devotion, steppe hordes that use horde unity, and tribes that use tribal cohesion. Look, all of this, at least monarchy, republic, theocracy, and steppe horde, should feel very, very familiar to you, because that is basically in EU4. Nonetheless, government types and tiers and all that stuff isn't exactly the same. Let's take a look at that. These government types, together with country rank, government form, and local flavor, gives countries names like Crown of Aragon, Kingdom of Sweden, Principality of Wales, and not all countries are countries that are based on owning locations on a map though. More on that in later development diaries. I assume what they might mean here is that the Holy Roman Empire does not necessarily need to own something, because, well, it is a title in spirit more than anything. Maybe the Mandate of Heaven works in that similar way as well. There are a lot of questions what exactly is meant here. I dove into the developer responses, but Johan is keeping silent here for sure. What exactly that means, we don't know. I will tell you though, the dynamic historical regional and cultural names are super cool. I love it, and I would like to see it in more games. I mean, Victoria 3, for example, most certainly would be better with it. I think there's a big mod, Otto's Names or something, for Victoria 3. It's definitely super cool. Each country also has a ruler, or they may be in a regency if there are no possible adult heirs. One of the most defining parts of the government of a country in Project Caesar is the estates mechanic. This has been one of the core parts of the game, with a full connection between the population and the estates. Keeping the estates satisfied while keeping their powers low is an important part of the gameplay loop. In this game, the estates are also active entities and will do things on their own if they get enough power. We can see here very clearly once more that in EU5, much like in EU4, you will have a central ruler, but that authority may not always be entirely absolute. We're looking at estates. These already exist in EU4, though of course in a not nearly as direct connection to your country as they do in EU5, or will be in EU5, because what has already been confirmed here is that these estates are directly tied to a population and so on. I assume we can basically kind of connect this already, although they are being very vague about how exactly these mechanics work. Just imagine, for example, you have a ton of nobles, and the more conscious they are, they talked about this in the previous dev diaries as well, the more conscious they are, the more will they demand stuff for estates. Now, how much they can demand and how exactly the estate power is being, minimized and maximized, depending on whether they are currently in the driver's seat or whether you're suppressing them, those are questions that we don't yet have answers for. One thing is clear, the estates mechanic already has, of course, some bases in EU4. I honestly kind of like it there as well, but very similar to governments and government reforms in EU4, they basically just exist to give you bonuses in one direction or another. The further EU5 moves away from that, and the more it makes it about just being an interesting government simulator, so to speak, I think the more will I enjoy it for sure. We can, for example, also see right here two government reforms, one culture-specific and one government-specific. What we have right here are, for example, the pashas that give you nobles power plus 100%. Well, I assume this is related to, for example, how much nobles give power directly to estates. I'm just trying to connect it here via the Victoria, Victoria 2 and Victoria 3 direction right there. I don't think Imperator Rome had anything that corresponded to this, and I can't recall anything in EU4, but to be fair, states are entirely on their own there anyway. It also gives you the bonus of minus 10% unrest, and then autocracy, which is basically just a government-specific one rather than a culture-specific one, gives you monthly progress to aristocracy plus 0.10. We're going to talk about that more in a second. I think I know perfectly well what exactly that means here, and it will give you crown power plus 10% as well. I assume crown power is basically the way it works in EU4 as well. If you've ever played EU4, then you will know it when you interact with the central power versus the estates and so on. So these two right here are indeed different government reforms. You will get more slots as you go, and of course these can be based on tag, culture, religion, or your government in particular. Very obvious stuff. I'm a big fan, in particular that they don't just give you modifiers that then directly, cut into your gameplay, but rather change the power situation in your realm. I really like the idea of that. Basically, the government that you are building from the very start is something that will still influence you at the end of your playthrough, rather than just being a modifier. And then what we have right here are laws. Now, these, honestly, when I looked at them, reminded me pretty straightforwardly of, maybe you guessed it, Imperator Rome laws. We have one big topic, in this case, language of pleading, and then different subcategories that I can choose depending on, whether I'm in the right spot. In Imperator Rome, it was sometimes technology limited, it was sometimes limited to who you were, where you were, and so on. We have here as the very first option, court language. This gives you monthly progress to serfdom, plus 0.1. Again, we're going to get to that later in the dev diary. It gives you peasant estate satisfaction equilibrium minus 10%, so basically where the peasants will be drifting naturally. This is already a case in EU4 as well. I really like the usage here of equilibrium, so what it drifts to naturally, because it will always keep it fluctuating, and your actions can't lock it in permanently. Big fan in general. I will say, just, as a quick comparison, in CK3, for example, I also wish that they worked much more with equilibriums. EU4 does it all the time, for example, namely with estates, but, CK3, when it comes to, for example, any kind of regency, or when it comes to stuff like, well, your, for example, legitimacy, I wish that was a natural equilibrium drift rather than just kind of a point where you are. The last thing this gives is also peasants' power minus 20%. Again, I think that essentially all of the different pop types have a certain strength, and then that strength is given to certain estates if they are politically active, quote-unquote, and this is influenced by the court language here, basically keeping the peasants down. The other option would be common language, so you're using the language of the people. The monthly progress here goes towards free subjects by plus 0.1, and then noble estate satisfaction equilibrium goes down to minus 10%. Makes a lot of sense. The nobles won't be happy that you will let anybody talk in the court. These are laws right here. A law can have several different policies that you can pick from, as you have now seen, and several laws have unique policies, only available to certain tags, religions, cultures, government types, or other factors. So similar to reforms, but indeed different, since they don't occupy a slot, but rather just are in a location that a law will cover no matter what. You can just choose what kind of direction it is. There are some drawbacks to adding new reforms or policies though, as it takes a few years for it to have full effect, depending on your country's administrative efficiency. Yes, that is a name for something else in another game, but it fits here. I really like the idea that it takes time, whatever you're doing, to change your society. Now I'm going to say something radical here, something that I believe Mario and Texas already does, but something that I never thought we would see in a vanilla version of a grand strategy game. And that is time for information and for implementation to travel. We kind of have this in various mechanics. For example, if you take a look at recalling a diplomat in EU4, if you look at institutions traveling, yeah, sure, that takes time to actually spread and so on. Even, illnesses in CK3 do. But if you institute a new tax law, in reality, this would take time and basically also be just differently efficient in different locations. For example, something very close to the imperial capital compared to something in the backwater middle of nowhere. Maybe reforms taking time here will also be something that is easier enacted in the direct core where you have a lot of power versus, in an area that is rather remote. I don't want to assume this though yet because they are being vague here and we don't have any confirmation, but I really like the hint towards this at the very least. The longer it takes to implement something rather complex, the happier will I be. Now beyond that, there will also be parliaments. Regularly, if your government allows it, you can call in a parliament. If you don't do it often enough, the estates will start to get irritated. However, each parliament has issues that need to be resolved, and the estates will have agendas they want done for their support. Of course, you also have options to push through what you want from a parliament, if you're willing to accept the demands of the estate, like changing a particular law. Parliaments already exist in EU4. Now, I actually kind of like them, but Johan responded in this very thread that he is not a big fan of the way that, parliament seats were done in EU4, that it just didn't age well. So what exactly this looks like, how you assign where the power bases in your country are, and of course who can participate in parliament in the first place is a secret. Maybe it is entirely done via government reforms and via laws, but nonetheless this should be interesting. In particular because it has been confirmed that you basically can call a parliament every 2 years, but you have to call it, or well, you should call it every 5 years, because after that your estates will get rather nervous. Either way, parliaments are definitely a good addition here, because this is something that just makes it much more active, much more interactive. The game basically gives you a lot of feedback. Now, regardless of how exactly parliament seats are assigned, agendas and, for example, winning over states are definitely not a new concept for EU4 or, well, EU5 here, so I will just see how that has developed, but it definitely sounds more like an evolution than a revolution. It is, of course, not really necessary to have a revolution here either. It's just really refreshing to hear that they will be back and that they will have evolved no matter what. Another part of the government is the cabinet, and now this one is interesting to me, which also grows in size as you become more advanced, allowing you to do more things. This is something that can be viewed as a hybrid between EU4 advisors and the CK2 council actions. I really love to hear this. I am so curious how much characters will actually play a role here, just how much they will be tracked in the first place, different from EU4 where advisors are basically just modifier banks. But man, if they work like CK2 and CK3 of course when it comes to council tasks, and if there will be more the longer you go, does that mean the members of that council will travel? Do they have their own agendas? Are they belonging to estates that then influence exactly what is going on? Who knows just how deep this will actually go. Let's not forget that EU as a series already goes pretty deep into governments. Now I will already say, despite this being primarily a CK channel, I hope that we don't mess around too much with grand families like it existed in Imperator Rome. I didn't really like that design. It's so easy to lose track of people. I just hope that the advisors are maybe tied to estates and then have their very own agenda, so that similar to CK2's council positions, even if you send them into a particular thing to do a particular task, somebody that hates you may just sabotage you. I would love that because it could make a civil war that much more personal. And now, last but not least, comes the topic of domestic policies, and this ties all of this together. Some of you may remember the domestic policies from EU2 and EU3. In Project Caesar, we are bringing the idea back in the form of societal values. There are 7 that we took from these games, 1 that was split in 2, and we added 4 new ones, bringing the total to 13 different societal values. Societal values are primarily affected by what other actions you do, like what policies you pick in a law or what reforms you pick. As with so many other things in our game, this is not an instant action, but a gradual change over time. I love to hear this. Listen, I have said now numerous times that I am not too big on sliders, but these sliders are actually some of my favorites. Hear me out here. There is, in my mind, a huge difference between a slider like in Victoria, where, I very much on a minuscule level change the taxation level and basically instantly as well, and the sliders that we have in EU and EU3 as well when it comes to taxation. There's a big difference between those and government sliders. EU2, EU3, they all had these government sliders, but they also all were instantaneous clicks. You basically would get a reminder, hey, you can move them again, and you would click it. And honestly, I love them in EU2 because it would change the flavor text for a government form if you moved it fast enough, but let's get rid of this. This idea in itself isn't bad because, well, you can get modifiers out of this, and they will be slow incremental changes rather than you passing a law and all of a sudden you are different. In this case, it doesn't seem as though in EU5 we will be clicking the button to go further towards aristocracy or plutocracy, or free subjects or serfdom. We've seen both of those earlier in this dev diary already. Instead, we set our nation up to be in a particular position, and that position will then create a new status quo for the longer we play. I absolutely love that. I think this long-term change, without very explicit laws being passed and just instantaneously changing it into the direction where we want it, is something that I really love. This makes it so, of course, that you come out the other end, so from 1337, let's say in 1600, with a very naturally driven society. And that kind of really is in theme for EU5. Natural societal shift seems to be the big name of the game. And that is also, quite frankly, what I'm the most excited for. I'm not entirely sure just how much they will leave the abstract board game nature of EU truly behind, but I'm also kind of fine with it, because, well, EU is a map painter, it's a blobber, and I like it for that. I know many others like it for that as well. If they, however, move the actual societal reforms, if they move the government reforms and all that stuff to a more simulationist approach, so your pops will influence how much power the estates have, then on top of that you change it by, switching some stuff around, taking some crown lands back, that kind of thing, and then all of that further goes into laws and reforms, changing up the entire makeup of your society via these sliders naturally drifting, I will be more than happy. It doesn't even need to be more realistic, it can be this level, and it would be perfect for me. Let me know how you feel about all this stuff. There was a lot of information in here, and a lot of information in the map as well, posted here, of course. Next week, I will see you again right here to learn more about the estates, to see whether I am correct about my assumptions with how they tie into pops, and of course how they tie into these sliders here as well. But I'll leave you right here. Let me know what you think about all of this, and I'll see you later, alligator.